Hey there. As podcasters, we all know that producing a podcast takes a ton of work, lots of investment, and lots of time. And once that recording is done and it's released to iTunes and your distribution outlets, your work's not done, right? You have to leverage the heck out of the content to boost visibility, boost your authority, and grow your listeners, your podcast, your business. Now, I've interviewed a ton of amazing experts on the Leverage Your Podcast show. And today I want to share with you some top tips that will help you with your podcast promotion. I even share a few tools that will make it easier. So let's take a listen. All right, so let's dive in. So again, I've interviewed a ton of different people on the show, LinkedIn experts, audio branding experts, Facebook ads, Pinterest, social media. So I thought I would pull together some of my favorite tips to help you with a podcast promotion. And I'm going to share some of those with you today. So my first one is LinkedIn. This is my favorite platform right now. I used to absolutely hate it, but I am enjoying it a ton more and getting some really good connections. And earlier on in the podcast, I interviewed Anthony Jones, a LinkedIn expert. And of course, go to smoothbusinessgrowth.com and you can check out the podcast and or on your favorite app and listen to that past episode, of course. Now, Anthony shares that out of 770 million users, that's a lot, who leverages LinkedIn every week, only 3 million of them actually post content. Isn't that crazy? And those 3 million content creators, and that's less than 1%, nuts, right? They get a mind-blowing 9 billion views every single week. Now, you can't ignore those stats. You simply can't. So his tip, of course, is to use LinkedIn when you're promoting your podcast and, use your profile. Use the featured section in your profile to feature some of your podcast episodes, and obviously promote your podcast on LinkedIn. And so, yes, it is definitely one of my favorite channels. So thank you, Anthony. The next tip is more about making your podcast promotion consumable. Now, I interviewed 𝗵𝗵𝗁. He is the founder of Repurpose.io for repurposing audio, video. Love that tool. And what he says is so spot on. Promoting your podcast is a long game. And, it's obviously you want to get your branding out there, build your authority, and so forth. And yes, of course, you want to link to your episodes on your website to get people to listen, but you also want to share consumable content. And what 𝗵𝗵𝗁 means by that is like audio clips, video clips, quotes, engagement posts, those kinds of things. And obviously with Repurpose, you can create those little square videos. You've seen them up on my social, I'm sure. And yes, it's Repurpose that I use so that when people are scrolling, they can just take like one little audio bite or one little video bite and a little nugget or a tip of the podcast. And if you brand it right with your podcast, it will be like teasing them to be like, ooh, I need to listen to that episode. Or, oh, that's really, great information. I need to subscribe to the podcast. So using consumable content and little pieces, and obviously Repurpose helps out a lot. Now, speaking of the social media and sharing those clips on Facebook, have you ever thought about using Facebook ads to get more listeners? I chatted with Jason Hunt, who's a Facebook ad expert, and he shared his process of what he does for his podcast and also his clients as well. And what he realized is that the clients and the leads that he was getting, they already felt like they knew who he was and his expertise. And they actually were listening to multiple episodes of his podcast. So his podcast was definitely generating new clients and new leads. So therefore, it makes sense to do Facebook ads to attract new listeners to the podcast so that they start to become nurtured, get to know him, learn his expertise, and then obviously move through the sales funnel and want his help. And so podcasting, again, just kind of like speeds up that process of you becoming a trusted expert faster. And so he puts budget into Facebook ads to, again, find new listeners for his podcast. So it makes total sense. And my next tip is with Deb Coleman. She's a content specialist, and she shares how to get more visibility on your podcast. So let's say you're sharing I had a guest on, and I'm sharing the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, wherever. You also want to make sure that you are tagging the guest. And if you're a guest and you're, sharing posts, by all means, tag in the host as well. Because they also watch their social media feed, right? And you want to get that conversation going. So by tagging them, it shows up on their feed. And so naturally you are tapping into their audience. And again, just exponentially, putting yourself in front of more people. But you're also getting those conversations going. So they're likely to make a comment, or maybe their listeners comment. And then you can kind of get that conversation going. And which obviously, again, helps with algorithms, but again, building those relationships and tapping into their community as well. So that was a super great tip from Deb. So I mentioned repurposing with Hani Mori's tip on repurposing your content, but I chatted with 𝗀𝗵𝗿𝗺𝗀𝗃 of 𝗀𝗍𝗍𝗃.ai, and she says to repurpose your podcast like Thanksgiving dinner. I love that. So kind of like you end up eating turkey for, 3 days later after Thanksgiving, you kind of need to do the same approach with your podcast. So repurposing all those elements of your podcast over and over and over again. And so creating micro content. So creating quote graphics or tips or engagement posts, audiograms, video snippets. So I always call them snackable bites. You probably heard me say that term, but pulling all those little pieces out of the podcast episode so that you're repurposing it. It's getting extra mileage. And you're also creating posts that are more engaging, right? And as Hani says, it's also consumable content. So I love that tip. And her tool, 𝗀𝗍𝗍𝗃 is pretty awesome as well. Speaking of tools, I love them. And in one of the episodes that I've done in the past, it was all about the different tools that I use in my podcaster's toolbox, so to speak. And you want to make sure that you are using these tools. Not only will it help you be branded, but it'll just make your life easier in regards to the amount of time it takes. It'll help automate some of the elements, and it just makes it so much easier. So some of those tools in my toolbox are Canva. I use those. Actually, I put my video in there and make it prettier. And we do all the graphics and all that good stuff in Canva. We use Headliner, which is for making those audiograms. I use Repurpose.io to make the square videos and the short video snippets. We use Buffer to pre-schedule our social media, such a time saver. And I also use LinkBio, which is lnk.bio. And that's so that the link that you have in your Instagram bio doesn't just go to your website. It goes to a sub page that has your podcast on there, a lead magnet. And so it has like multiple links on it. So it just makes it easier for people to like, go to your link and check out all your good stuff. So feel free to go back to that episode. I'll have the links in the show notes. If you want to hear more about all the different tools that I use. Now, I shared about LinkedIn. And but I also came across over the past year a woman named 𝗀𝗃𝗲𝗲 of 𝗁𝗵𝗁, and I was checking her out, and I saw her Pinterest boards account, and I was like, dang, where have I been? Pinterest has changed so much. So I had to have her on the show. And she uses Pinterest to promote her podcast. And one of the ways that she does it is by using idea pins. So it's almost like different slides, like sharing like a step-by-step tip that came from the podcast, or like if your podcast was like the 5 ways that you blah, blah, blah. And then you would show all those 5 different ways. And then of course in the, end screen, you're prompting them to listen to the whole episode. So it's just a really neat way of promoting your podcast if you're on Pinterest or if that matches your target market and your audience. But she is like crushing it. So highly recommend following 𝗀𝗃𝗲𝗲, the Pinterest expert. Now, my next tip, I'm not going to share information about ranking on iTunes. I'm not going to share information about monetization. And I'm not going to share information on how to break down podcast ads. So what am I going to cover? Well, I'm going to cover how to create honey traps to create curiosity and more lessons. See what I did there? And so so I was chatting with Deidre Shen of Capshow, and her app is able to, like, you bring in the audio or the blog or whatever it is, and it pulls it apart so that it creates curiosity to grab more attention and attract listeners to your podcast. It's super cool. So one of her methodologies is the content honey trap. Again, you can listen to more on that episode, but she shares how to create that curiosity. And obviously with me saying, I'm not going to share about this, I'm not going to share about this, people are going to be like, what are you going to share? And so that is just like one of the ways in which you can create that honey trap to create more curiosity and attract more listeners to your podcast. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I've given you 8 killer tips from my favorite top experts, and I hope you gleaned at least one of them. And if you are looking for more ways to get consistent with your podcast promotion, I definitely recommend going to check out my podcast leverage system, which is leverageyourpodcast.com/free. I actually have a free training there. So be sure to check that out. And I'll see you next week.